You were looking at a perfectly preserved ticking pocket watch that's just locked inside a tomb. I mean, it's entirely self-contained, wound up completely tight, and you listening to this right now are just trapped watching the gears grind down to zero. So today we are opening up this incredibly granular historical guidebook.
Cinema, the Magic Vehicle, a comprehensive guide. Journey 1, 1913 to 1950.
To examine a 1924 German silent film called New Year's Eve, or, well, the original title is Silvester Tragödie einer Nacht. And it is so radical, so like dangerously visceral, it just completely shatters what we assume early cinema was actually capable of. I mean, it's a properly genius piece of art.
Are you joking? I mean, properly genius. Come off it. You cannot be serious right now.
I'm dead serious. It is an absolute cinematic masterpiece.
It is a bit overhyped, for being completely honest. I mean, historically interesting as an artifact, sure, but its actual legacy is dodgy in places, to say the very least. You're looking at it with completely rose-tinted glasses just because it's obscure.
I am not. I am looking at it for what it mechanically and, well, psychologically achieves. Look, let me just set the scene for you and for you listening right now.
Yeah.
If you're exhausted by modern media, if you are sitting there thinking, I cannot watch another hollow CGI superhero reboot, then cinema, the magic vehicle, is the antidote.
Right, because reading about a 100-year-old miserable film is exactly what people want.
It is this absolute brick of a historical guidebook. It chronicles films from 1913 all the way to 1950. And it's not just some dry list. It actually provides the socio-political context for drama, sci-fi, film noir, just everything.
Yeah.
And right there, buried in this book, I find New Year's Eve, directed by Lupo Pick, written by the legendary Carl Mayer.
Yeah.
And finding this film, it genuinely changes how you view the entire evolution of movies.
It sits there and is rather dull. I mean, that's what it actually does. Look, I understand the appeal of the book. I do. It's a wonderful resource that points us to things we've forgotten. But just because a film is a forgotten relic doesn't automatically make it a hidden gem. Sometimes things are forgotten because they belong in the archive, gathering dust.
You cannot possibly call this film dull.
I can, and I just did.
We are talking about a script by Carl Mayer, the man who practically invented psychological cinema.
Yeah.
And he is forcing a tiny cast to endure pure emotional agony. You've got Eugen Klepfer playing the husband, Edith Pasca as the wife, and Frida Richard as the mother. That is the core cast, and it's entirely contained within exactly 1,529 meters of film.
Which is such a bizarrely specific physical way to romanticize 1,529 meters of absolute melodrama.
Bizarre. It is a tactile reality. Is 1,529 meters of celluloid physically spooling through a projector, equating to a pure, raw, suffocating human experience.
Let's talk about this so-called raw plot that you think is so revolutionary, shall we? Because, frankly, it is the flimsiest possible premise for such heavy-handed, oppressive execution.
It's beautifully simple.
A cafe owner is driven into a nightmare by the bitter hostility between his wife and his mother. They bicker. The tension rises. And the only exit to this domestic hell seems to be the husband committing suicide at the exact stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve. I mean, that is the entire plot. It couldn't be simpler because it's essentially a soap opera being treated like a Greek tragedy.
That's exactly why it is bloody brilliant. I mean, think about the era. This is 1924. Cinema was still entirely finding its feet, mostly relying on these massive historical epics.
Well, not entirely, but yes, the spectacles were popular.
All right, think of D.W. Griffith, or those massive European spectacles with kings and queens or mythological creatures. The scale was always enormous because they were desperately trying to prove cinema was as grand as opera. And then here comes Lupo Pick and Carl Mayer, and they say no. The most devastating drama isn't a war. It isn't a crumbling empire. It's an inescapable, agonizing family argument in a cramped room.
It's a mother-in-law and a wife having a spat over a table. That's what it is. It's too much. It's entirely overwrought.
But look at why they did it. They took the completely mundane, ordinary life of a bloke who just runs a small cafe, and they treated his internal psychological nightmare with the absolute utmost seriousness. And you have to remember the context of 1924 Germany. This is the Weimar Republic.
Right, recovering from the First World War.
Recovering from the war, yes, but also coming right off the back of the hyperinflation crisis of 1923. So a cafe owner in 1924 isn't just a guy pouring coffee. This is a man whose entire existence is economically and socially fragile. His world is an absolute pressure cooker.
And so they add a nagging family on top of it.
Yes, because everyone listening to this right now has had a nightmare holiday dinner. Everyone has felt that suffocating tension of two family members who just absolutely despise each other, and you are trapped right in the middle, and you can't leave because it's literally your house.
I think comparing a mild holiday annoyance to a suicide is exactly the overreaction I'm talking about.
Elevating that granular, highly specific domestic claustrophobia to the level of tragedy is monumental. Nobody was doing that.
But the execution is so stifling. Let's actually talk about how they execute this supposedly relatable plot, because this is where the entire thing just falls over for me. The film distills the essence of what's called the Kammerspiel style.
The chamber play, which has its roots in theater.
Exactly, the
Great.
chamber play style. Max Reinhardt's Kammerspiel Theater in Berlin, originally. The whole idea was to move away from the grand, booming theatrics of large auditoriums and put the audience right up close to the actors in a tiny room so you could see every twitch of an eyebrow.
Which translates beautifully to film.
Does it? Because the book points out that Pick and Mayer obey a rigorous unity of place here. The entire thing is restricted to this small cafe, the living quarters in the back, and the neighboring streets. And, crucially, it obeys a strict unity of time and action. The drama lasts exactly as long as the film itself.
Which is mental. It is absolutely mental that they attempted this mechanically in 1924.
Mental is one word for it, restrictive is another.
No, hear me out. We're talking about the silent era. Editing at this time was generally just used to skip the boring parts. Like if a character needs to go from their house to the bank, you cut out the 20-minute walk.
Obviously. Because watching them walk is dull.
But Mayer and Pick decided to attempt a mathematical one-to-one real-time structure. They calculated the exact projection speed of 1,529 meters of film, and they mapped the narrative time precisely to it, trapping the viewer in the exact, literal time frame of the characters.
And I'm saying that's a mistake.
When you are watching that celluloid spool out, you are experiencing the exact same grueling minutes and seconds as that poor cafe owner. It's brilliant.
Hold on a second, hold on. This unity of place and time, this obsession with making it one-to-one, is exactly why the film feels like a stifling, claustrophobic stage play rather than a true cinematic experience.
How is it not cinematic?
Because cinema, by its very nature, is about the manipulation and freedom of time and space. You can cut from one year to the next. You can cross the globe in an absolute instant. Why would you take this magical new medium and purposefully chain it to the rules of a cheap theater production?
Because the restriction is the point. It's about forcing empathy through duration. Look, you listening right now, imagine this. Just imagine watching a movie where every single agonizing second of a bitter, inescapable family argument played out in real time.
Sounds like a miserable evening at the pictures.
You can't jump forward to when it's over. You can't cut to the next morning when everyone is finally cooled off.
Yeah.
You have to sit there trapped in that room with them, minute by minute, second by second, as the clock physically ticks closer to midnight.
Yes, and I'm saying
That is not a stage play. That is psychological torture, and it is visceral filmmaking.
it's a gimmick. It's a total gimmick. And it's a gimmick that they couldn't even fully commit to, which the book Cinema, the Magic Vehicle, rightly calls them out on.
What do you mean they couldn't commit? They stripped it down to the absolute bone. There are no intertitles. None. Not a single text card in the entire film.
Which was a terrible, terrible idea.
No, it's pure visual storytelling. The narrative is conducted entirely without those little black and white text cards popping up every 10 seconds. The creators felt titles were unnecessary for this, what do they call it in the book? An instinctive drama.
Yes, instinctive drama. A very lofty, pretentious term for a film where you basically have to guess what people are screaming at each other.
They felt text would sound a discordant note. They wanted a universal, timeless dimension. You don't actually need to read the specific words the wife is yelling at the mother to know she's yelling and to know it's breaking the husband's spirit.
You lose all the nuance.
Human body language is universal. The anger, the pointing, the shrinking away, it completely transcends language. That's the absolute purity of silent film.
But here's where the so-called genius falls apart into dodgy, pretentious nonsense. They stripped out the title cards, fine.
Because they were brave.
Because they trapped themselves in this incredibly boring, claustrophobic room with this real-time rule, and they suddenly realized it was visually monotonous.
It's not monotonous, it's focused.
You can only watch people argue in a parlor for so long before your eyes completely glaze over. So what did Mayer and Pick actually do to compensate for the total lack of dialogue? They counterpointed the claustrophobic world of the cafe with metaphorical cutaway images.
Which are architecturally gorgeous.
They are completely jarring. I mean, you're watching an argument in a cafe, the tension is building, and suddenly, bam, a shot of the churning sea.
It's poetic.
Then back to the argument. Then bam, a deserted cemetery. Then somber tree branches, lonely sand dunes. I mean, the book explicitly notes that these expressionist leanings towards artificial treatment were highly misleading.
The book is being too harsh there.
The book says they completely precluded the attainment of the natural psychological realism that the makers were originally aiming for. They shot themselves in the foot.
That's rubbish, mate.
Yeah.
Complete rubbish.
It's not rubbish. It's right there in the historical analysis. They wanted naturalism, ordinary people in an ordinary cafe, and then they just abandoned it for dodgy expressionist gimmicks because they didn't know how to sustain the psychological tension without any text.
You can't be serious. If you strip away the words, if you physically remove the title cards from the reel, you absolutely must use the environment to show the internal psychological state of the characters. That is the whole point of Impressionism.
Impressionism. I mean, are you joking?
Yeah.
Impressionism is Monet painting a lovely little pond with water lilies to capture the fleeting light. This is German Expressionism, mate.
Right, Expressionism, obviously. Slip of the tongue.
Yeah.
But the point still stands. Let's actually define Expressionism for a second. It's not just a buzzword. Expressionism is about taking the objective reality of the world and twisting it to reflect the subjective, internal, emotional state of the character.
And I'm saying cutting to a dune is a lazy way to do that.
You can't just have an actor making an anguished face for an hour straight. When the husband is feeling completely isolated and dead inside from this unending argument, cutting to a deserted cemetery or a lonely sand dune isn't a gimmick. It is a visual translation of his soul.
It's hilarious is what it is.
It's the director using the camera to explicitly say, this is what it feels like inside this man's head right now.
Yeah.
It's an externalization of his internal collapse.
It's a sledgehammer is what
You're
it
right.
is. It is so blunt.
Yeah.
And I'm not the only one who thinks so, obviously.
Or the critics of the time didn't get it either, so you're in good company.
The book itself points out that this sent Kammerspiel in a totally misleading direction. You don't achieve gritty, working-class realism by randomly cutting to a lonely dune every time your protagonist feels a bit sad.
It's not about him feeling a bit sad. It's about him reaching the edge of sanity.
Let's just put the dodgy dunes and tree branches aside for a moment, because the real irony of these clumsy visual metaphors is that they completely distract from the one thing Pick and Mayer actually got perfectly right in this film.
Oh.
And that is the camera itself. I will concede that the technical elements here are, well, noteworthy.
Oh, here we go. The cynic finally admits it. It's a technical triumph.
I didn't say triumph, I said noteworthy. Don't push it.
Cinema, the magic vehicle, says it reaches its absolute pinnacle here.
Yeah.
We have to talk about the cinematographers, Guido Sieber and Carl Hasselmann.
Right, because to actually understand New Year's Eve, you have to understand it's actually the second part of a planned screen trilogy by the scriptwriter Carl Mayer. Part one was a film called Shattered, which Luca Pick also directed.
Yes. And in Shattered, they began experimenting with what they call the epoch of the freely mobile camera, or in German, the Entfesselte camera, the unchained camera.
A very dramatic term for putting a camera on wheels.
But here, in New Year's Eve, headed by Guido Sieber under Mayer's guidance, that freely mobile camera reaches its absolute pinnacle. It is a proper masterpiece of mechanical ingenuity.
It's definitely innovative for 1924, I'll give you that.
Think about the physics of it. Cameras back then were not iPhones. They weren't even the lightweight shoulder rigs of the 1960s.
No, they were massive, heavy, static blocks of wood and metal.
They were
bolted down like bank vaults on these heavy wooden tripods. You turned a hand crank to expose the film. If you wanted a different angle, you had to physically stop filming, pick the whole massive apparatus up, move it across the room, set it down, level it, and start cranking again.
Exactly. And Sieber Mayer completely unchained it. They didn't just leave it bolted to the floor in the corner of the room like everyone else was doing.
Oh, they put it on tracks and dollies?
They strapped it to dollies. They moved it around this stifling little cafe to capture the suffocating reality of these people. They moved with the actors, creeping down hallways, pushing right into their faces as the tension rose.
Which, I admit, does add to the claustrophobia.
It sounds totally basic to us now, but to an audience in 1924, seeing the camera actually glide through a room was like watching magic.
Yes, it was dynamic.
And it wasn't just the camera movement, it was the lighting. The dramatic employment of the interplay of light and darkness reaches absolute maturity in this film.
The chiaroscuro.
Yes, chiaroscuro, the sharp high contrast lighting. And again, think of the mechanics of that. They didn't have modern, cool-running LED lights.
They had carbon arc lamps.
Right. These were essentially controlled electrical fires that sputtered and hissed and threw off intense heat just to get enough exposure on that incredibly slow, orthochromatic film stock.
They must have been miserable to act under those.
It probably added to the tension.
Yeah.
And with those primitive, dangerous lights, they painted the set in these oppressive architectural shadows that practically swallow the characters whole.
They definitely liked their shadows.
The book literally says, from a historical perspective, these are the greatest contributions of the Expressionists to the evolution of the language of cinema. We literally wouldn't have modern cinematic language, from film noir to modern thrillers, without what they built right here in this cramped little room.
Wait. You are giving Lupo Pick entirely too much credit here.
How am I giving him too much credit? He directed it.
Let me tell you what the true saving grace of this entire production was.
Oh, please enlighten me.
It was the behind-the-scenes shambles.
His shambles.
Yes, the absolute chaos behind the camera, because there was a massive relationship-ending falling out between the writer Carl Mayer and the director, Lupo Pick.
Right. Well, they had a disagreement during the production.
A disagreement. It was a massive one. They completely fell out over how to handle these exact elements we're talking about. And it was so bad that Pick didn't even direct the third part of the planned trilogy.
Which was a shame for him, but a win for us.
Thank goodness they had that massive argument, or we wouldn't have got F.W. Murnau stepping in to direct part 3, which was The Last Laugh.
Which obviously is an undeniable masterpiece. I'm not arguing that.
Exactly. The Last Laugh opened totally new vistas for German cinema. Murnau took all these little technical experiments Pick was clumsily playing with in New Year's Eve, the unchained camera, the psychological lighting, and actually turned them into cohesive high art.
But they originated here.
I view Pick's direction here in New Year's Eve as a mere stepping stone. It's a rough draft. It's a laboratory experiment. I simply refuse to give it the pinnacle status you so desperately want to assign it when the true pinnacle came immediately after, precisely because they couldn't stand working with each other anymore.
But you can't have The Last Laugh without New Year's Eve. They built the mechanical and philosophical tools right here.
She stumbled into them.
The makers of this film intended to use the whole palette of effects, the real-time structure, the lack of titles, the mobile camera, the aggressive shadows, to create a completely unified atmosphere of stress, to make the audience feel exactly as the characters feel. And the book admits, this aim is certainly achieved. It works. You feel the stress.
It works entirely too well. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the ultimate downfall of the film.
There is no downfall. The fact that it succeeds in stressing you out is absolute proof of its genius.
There is a massive downfall, and it's philosophical. The book puts it perfectly. The taint of finality and determinism is incredibly heavy in this film.
Heavy doesn't mean bad.
It is far too much. It is suffocating in a way that ceases to be art and just becomes outright punishment for the viewer.
Determinism.
Yes, determinism. The idea that these characters have absolutely no free will, that they are just trapped on a track heading toward a cliff. The entire core idea of the film, its central thesis, is that when the burden of suffering becomes too heavy to bear, one can either destroy the apparent source of it or kill oneself.
Which, given the agonizing setup and the psychological state of the husband, is the logical endpoint of the tragedy.
It is painfully prescriptive. It is deeply, fundamentally depressing. Think about the historical context again. We talked about the Weimar Republic. It's 1924.
Right.
People have lived through the muddy trenches of World War I. They've lived through the 1923 hyperinflation where people were literally taking wheelbarrows of useless cash to the bakery just to buy a loaf of bread.
Which is exactly why the film is so relevant to
No, it's why they hated it. They had the political assassinations, the street violence. They had enough real-world misery. They were dealing with absolute chaos in everyday life. And they scraped together a few coins to go to the cinema for a bit of escapism, and Lupo Pick traps them in a room in real time and tells them, hey, if things get really tough at home, your only options are murder or suicide.
He wasn't telling them that's what they should do.
That's what the film preaches. That's rubbish.
Yeah.
No wonder audiences at the time completely rejected it.
They weren't ready for it. They wanted easy escapism, sure. But Mayer wanted to show them the mirror.
It made absolutely no connection with contemporary everyday life in Germany because it was too bleak, even for a bleak era. The book concludes that it remains a sealed footnote, self-contained but perennial.
Exactly.
Perennial.
It's a footnote. It's not the main text of cinematic history. It's a sealed off, little depressing experiment that failed to resonate with the very people it was desperately trying to reflect.
Hear me out, just hear me out.
Go on.
The fact that it is a sealed footnote doesn't mean it's a failure. It means it was too pure for its time. You are ignoring the most vital visual contrast in the entire film, which perfectly captures that determinism you hate so much and proves why it is actually perennial.
Let me guess. The crowd outside.
Yes. The visual contrast of the outside world.
It's on the nose.
You have the absolute immobility and despair of these three miserable people, the husband, the wife, the mother, trapped in this stifling, dark, shadowy interior.
And Lupu constantly contrasts them against the animation and the general rejoicing of the crowd celebrating New Year in the brightly lit hall outside and on the streets.
Yes, the world moves on while you suffer. It's not exactly a subtle point, mate.
It doesn't need to be subtle. It needs to be true. And it is an incredibly potent, universal feeling. Look, put yourself in that exact situation. Has you ever had a genuinely terrible New Year's Eve?
I generally try to avoid them altogether, if I'm honest. Too much pressure.
But think about the modern equivalent. Think about you listening to us right now. Think about sitting alone in a dark room on New Year's Eve.
A very cheerful image to paint for the audience.
Maybe you've had a horrible fight with your family. Maybe you're just feeling utterly defeated by the year, economically, socially, whatever. And you are doom scrolling on your phone in the dark. But it's real. You are sitting there in the dark, absolutely miserable. And outside your window, you can actually hear people setting off fireworks. You can hear cheering. You look on your screen on social media and you see everyone else partying in brightly lit halls, celebrating, completely oblivious to your despair.
Right.
That contrast, that oppressive, suffocating feeling that the rest of the world is rejoicing while you are just trapped in a nightmare, is emotionally spot on. It is exactly what this film captured, with its lighting, its camera, and its real-time structure all the way back in 1924.
Which just proves my point.
How does that prove your point?
Because it is miserable. It is a brilliant psychological study, maybe, but as entertainment, as a piece of narrative art that connects with the human spirit and offers some sort of catharsis, it completely fails.
Art doesn't have to be comfortable.
It is a sealed footnote for a very good reason. It's a flawed, overly deterministic experiment that thankfully forced Mayer to go work with Murnau and make something actually profound that audiences could stomach.
I completely disagree. I think it is a breathtaking, technically genius piece of Kammerspiel history.
Of course you do.
It doesn't need to offer you polite, comfortable catharsis. It deserves absolute reverence for being bold enough to trap you in that room and make you feel the exact weight of that despair.
Well, we are just going to have to go in circles on this because I am never going to concede that a 1,500-meter film about a mother-in-law spat ending in suicide is the absolute pinnacle of the silent era.
It's the technical pinnacle.
It's just not my cup of tea. It's historically important, yes, but my God, it's a slog.
Well, let me leave you, the person actually listening to us bicker right now, with his one final thought. My cynical friend here thinks that the film's real-time structure and its absolute crushing determinism failed to connect with 1920s audiences because it was simply too oppressive, too miserable.
Because it was.
But look at us today. Look at what we consume right now. We're utterly obsessed with real-time, high-stress, hopelessly bleak media. We binge-watch relentless shows about inescapable family trauma. We absolutely love films that trap us in a single room with people just tearing each other apart psychologically. Lupupic's oppressive, deterministic nightmare was too much for them back in Weimar, Germany. What does it say about you, the modern viewer, that you might actually be the exact perfect target audience for this forgotten, sealed footnote?